question is posed with a challenge to the gods of politics. Does the nation truly have room for a woman to be president? The former First Lady delivers her verdict, a tragic one in her view. As we saw in this past election, she says, "Sadly, we ain't ready. Don't even look at me about running." She frames it as an indictment of the entire electorate, accusing the public of dishonesty and insisting that America is not ready for a woman. With that opening salvo, the battle lines are drawn, leaving one commentator visibly stunned. He replays the charge in his mind. "We ain't ready." There is a brief calm before the counteroffensive begins. To him, this is logical fallacy 101. The foundation of her argument, he argues, is deeply flawed. The fact that certain candidates failed does not mean the country is incapable of electing a woman. And so, the war begins. Bill Maher sets his sights on Michelle Obama, and the engagement is intense as he prepares to torch what he sees as her claims of gender bias in America. Her recent eyebrow-raising remarks set the stage for confrontation, but his response is designed not just to dismantle her argument, but to expose what he believes are glaring double standards beneath it. The audience is told to brace for impact. Maher begins calmly, noting that, of all the ways America continues to divide itself, nowhere is it more pronounced than in gender. He calls it a tragic schism, one Democrats must confront or risk political ruin. He lays out his view bluntly. Women are the Democratic base, and men who get hit in the head for a living are trumps. He paints a picture of two warring camps, describing what he calls the bro party of car shows and raw impulse versus its opposite. For years, he argues, it has been the mommy party against the daddy party, the party of cats versus the party of truck nuts. He shines a spotlight on this growing gender divide, a political chasm he says should alarm the entire republic. One gender pledges loyalty to one party while the other gravitates toward its rival. This, he suggests, is not progress, but deepening polarization. He makes clear that there is no honor in such division, but this is only the opening move. What truly ignites his offensive is the claim, amplified by Michelle Obama, that America is inherently biased against a female president. He rejects this outright, seeing it as a corrosive fiction that ignores reality and fuels further division. As the clip rolls, the studio holds its breath. Maher pulls no punches. His takedown is sharp, unapologetic, and brutally direct. He says he was shocked by her statement and repeats her words, "Sadly, we ain't ready." Then he delivers his central rebuttal. To him, this is a basic logical error. Just because the country wasn't ready for, or simply didn't like, Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris does not mean it isn't ready for a woman. The premise of her argument begins to fracture under scrutiny. Her words echo again. "Don't even look at me about running because you are all lying. You're not ready for a woman." She frames it as proof that there are still men who cannot bear to be led by a woman. Maher pushes back, calling it a bad attitude. He reminds the audience that people once said America wasn't ready for a black president either, before history proved otherwise. Maybe, he suggests, it just has to be the right one. The audience reacts as he zeroes in on what he sees as the fatal gaps in the argument. The failure of Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, he insists, is not evidence of a nation's prejudice, but of flawed candidates and political realities rather than an inability to accept a woman as president. It was simply the fate of candidates who failed to resonate. Maher insists that Americans do not cast their ballots based on gender alone. They vote for leaders who understand their struggles, speak to their concerns, and propose solutions. To reduce this sacred democratic act to mere sexism, he argues, is both lazy and a profound dismissal of voters themselves. According to Maher, people are not rejecting women. They are rejecting policies, personalities, and messages that fail to connect. To pretend otherwise is to willfully ignore the truth, and in doing so, the left only fuels more resentment while completely missing what voters are actually asking for. The battle then shifts to a new front, Michelle Obama's hair. She had said she was shocked by the scrutiny, explaining that she didn't really have a choice. Every time she was up, as she put it, she was on display for the public. The days were long and the burdens heavy, and saving time became a necessity rather than a choice. A full glam team, a trio of stylists, was not a luxury, she insisted, but a requirement. How, she asked, could anyone be expected to manage hair, makeup, and wardrobe alone under such relentless public pressure? Where, she wondered, is the woman who can live off the rack? No one can, she implied. One must submit to the demands of hair and makeup teams. Here, critics point out what they see as a critical flaw. Michelle Obama has repeatedly positioned herself as a symbol of female struggle, yet her interviews often dwell on the personal burdens of public scrutiny. This focus, they argue, distracts from her broader message. Maher seizes on this as a contradiction. On one hand, she claims women are fully capable of leading a nation. On the other, she frequently emphasizes how exhausting basic grooming becomes under public attention. To him, these stories, while perhaps genuine, pull attention away from the argument of strength she claims to champion. For someone in that position to then lecture the country about its supposed fear of female leadership feels less like empowerment and more like political theater. He then delivers what he presents as his final, decisive strike. How wealthy, he asks, have they become since leaving office? The question hangs in silence. He concedes that they served the country, but for a not insignificant salary of around $400,000 a year. A president lives in unparalleled luxury while in office, and after leaving, often earns hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars. He pauses and jokes about needing a tiny violin to play in sympathy. To him, the argument is finished. The commentary grows harsher. He mocks her appearance, drawing laughter, and claims that excessive wealth warps perspective. He says he has never met someone so ungrateful, accusing her of beginning her critiques by claiming people call her hateful because she is. He goes further, alleging that she cannot stand America, cannot stand Barack Obama, and may not even like herself. He frames her public appearances as part of a non-stop tour driven by grievance, arguing that there is a strain within what he calls woke politics that leads to misery. Megyn Kelly then cuts to what she sees as the core issue when explaining why voters didn't rally behind Kamala Harris and why they wouldn't line up behind Michelle Obama either. In her view, it is simple. Both women represent a hyper-woke political culture that many Americans are exhausted by. Instead of focusing on core concerns that shape everyday life, the economy, safety, stability, and national strength, they emphasize symbolic battles and peripheral issues that feel disconnected from real struggles. Kelly argues that this fixation on identity politics does not inspire confidence. It alienates voters who want practical leadership, not lectures. What makes it even more jarring, she adds, is the tendency to criticize America while thriving within it. To many Americans, that contradiction rings hollow. In her view, it is not sexism keeping these women out of the White House. It is their message, their priorities, and their disconnect from reality, critics argue, are impossible to ignore. One clip is cited to illustrate what they see as another problem with the Michelle Obama brand. In it, she addresses white audiences directly, explaining that black hair naturally grows in a curly pattern and that straightening it to meet dominant beauty standards creates constant pressure. She describes how maintaining straight hair affects daily choices, from avoiding swimming to skipping the gym, and argues that braids exist, so black women can work harder and focus on their jobs. She questions why laws are even needed to tell white people to get out of our hair. That clip, critics say, highlights what they view as her relentless fixation on racial identity. They argue that Michelle Obama frequently centers race in her messaging, sometimes in ways that overshadow broader political issues. To them, the repetition feels excessive and contradictory to the liberal ideal of moving beyond racial categories. For years, progressives promoted a colorblind vision of equality, yet Michelle Obama, in their view, does the opposite by placing race at the center of nearly every narrative, grievance, and political argument. This, they say, is why she is labeled woke, because woke politics does not erase racial lines, but obsessively reinforces them. She then returns to her central claim, saying that the lack of room for a woman to be president was proven in the most recent election. Sadly, she says, America still isn't ready. She insists people shouldn't even ask her to run, accusing the public of lying to itself. In her view, the country has growing up to do, and too many men still cannot accept being led by a woman. When pressed, she repeats the sentiment, reaffirming her belief that the problem lies not with candidates, but with the nation itself. Many critics reject that conclusion outright. They argue the issue is not that Americans need to grow, but that voters expect candidates to meet real-world standards. People do not vote for someone simply because she is a woman. They vote for ideas, competence, and policies that move the country forward. That, they argue, is the part Michelle Obama ignores. Voters are not obligated to reward a candidate for checking identity boxes. They want leaders who understand their struggles and offer concrete solutions. Critics apply the same reasoning to Kamala Harris. They argue that if she had stepped away from what they see as hyper-woke rhetoric and focused on core issues like the economy, safety, affordability, jobs, and stability, she might have earned far more support. Instead, they say, she spent years doubling down on ideological talking points that felt disconnected from everyday life. That, in their view, is why she lost support. Not because Americans fear women, but because Americans expect substance. Gender does not win elections, they insist. Leadership does. Maher's broader message to Michelle Obama and the Democratic Party follows naturally from this conclusion. He argues that when you're in a hole, the solution is to stop digging, not to keep doubling down on the very arguments that led to defeat. Even when liberals concede that they should stop calling Trump voters stupid, he suggests the implication often remains. They still believe it, they just don't want to say it out loud. According to Maher, comments like Michelle Obama's only deepen voter frustration and may have directly contributed to the party's losses. He argues Democrats continue to sabotage themselves by clinging to divisive narratives instead of addressing what voters actually care about. Rather than reflecting on defeat and changing course, party leaders appear determined to repeat the same mistakes. To many critics, Michelle Obama's rhetoric is not a moment of clarity, but a symbol of the Democrats' refusal to learn anything from their losses. Instead of focusing on the economy, border security, affordability, or issues that affect real families, critics argue that Democrats continue to push identity-driven talking points that turn voters away. In Maher's view, until the party stops fixating on these narratives, it will continue to lose elections, and Michelle Obama's comments only deepen the damage. He mocks what he sees as cultural excesses, pointing to slogans, protests, lingering pandemic habits, and ideological language that alienate everyday voters. He ridicules the party's association with teachers' unions and claims schools and colleges have been turned into a joke. In his framing, Democrats didn't just lose a close contest, they lost credibility, even managing to lose to someone he describes as openly unfit. Maher lays out his broader argument about why Kamala Harris struggled politically, insisting the real battlefield was messaging, not gender. The country did not reject her because she was a woman, he argues, but because of her platform. He contends that voters had grown weary of what they perceived as the Democratic Party's ever-expanding ideological agenda, one that felt disconnected from the concerns of ordinary citizens. From foreign policy stances that critics say appeared to side with radical actors, to constant identity-based appeals at home, the party, in his view, alienated large segments of the electorate. He also points to cultural and social policies advanced by the left that many voters regarded as overreach, particularly those involving children and aggressive, progressive social campaigns. According to this argument, voters were not confused or irrational. They simply refused to sign on for another 4 years of what they saw as ideological experimentation. What was rejected, Maher insists, was not women or equality, but priorities, values, trust, and credibility. Speaking truth to power, he acknowledges, is a noble ideal. But he argues Democrats lost the ability to speak truth to their own data and polling. Intelligence from Democratic-aligned firms had reportedly warned months in advance that even black voters, long considered a reliable base, increasingly viewed the administration as too liberal rather than too conservative. The data suggested voters didn't just want Harris to distance herself from Biden, but to break entirely from what they believed the Democratic Party had become, a distorted parody of its former ideals. As dissent grows louder, commentators note that frustration now exists, even within core Democratic constituencies, including black voters. While many still turn out to vote Democratic, that loyalty no longer guarantees confidence or enthusiasm. A growing number feel the party that once fought for economic opportunity, community security, and tangible progress has been overtaken by a fixation on symbolism, moral lecturing, and fringe cultural battles. That sense of disillusionment continues to deepen. From this perspective, when Michelle Obama claims America rejects women due to gender bias, critics argue the claim misses the point entirely. The real question, they say, is not whether voters reject candidates because they are women, but whether they reject candidates whose ideas feel disconnected from their lived experience. The issue is not identity or rhetoric, but the fundamental concerns that shape daily life. In the end, many Americans, including Black Americans, according to this view, are not asking for ideological sermons. They are asking for leadership. The core struggle is not about gender, but about substance. Critics argue that Michelle Obama's statements, along with the Democratic Party's broader ideological direction, reveal a widening gap between political elites and voters. People want policies that strengthen their lives, not performative politics or identity-based messaging. Until leadership addresses these real-world concerns, they warn, trust, support, and political power will continue to erode, regardless of who is on the ballot.